Denver Sports presents the Mile High Hockey Podcast with Mike Evans, presented by Fort Comfort Gutters. Now here's your host with the latest on the Burgundy and Blue, Mike Evans.
Hey everybody, welcome in. Good to have you with us under really positive vibes right now when it comes to the Avalanche. As I'm sitting here talking to you right now, they're in the midst of a 5-game winning streak. They've climbed to first place in the Central Division. Nathan MacKinnon is singing the praises of the new acquisitions and how they're all fitting in. Life is pretty good right now if you're an Avalanche fan, and you got to be excited about where this season is going. Not that it was depths of despair before the trade deadline, but we've been talking about this several times on this podcast, the feeling that while the Avalanche were certainly good, there was that feeling that something was missing, and that, sure, they could be among the group of teams that could be a threat to win a Stanley Cup, but was there any evidence to suggest that they were separating themselves from that pack? With these new acquisitions and the way that they've come out immediately playing with these new acquisitions, it's fun to speculate about whether or not they've made that leap. And if the moves that they've made this trade deadline, similar to what they did in their Cup year, to help form that separation between them and the rest of the division, the rest of the Western Conference, maybe the rest of the league. As we sit here right now, the Avs are in that jumbled mix for Stanley Cup favorites. If you listen to the odds makers, Florida is a slight favorite to win the Stanley Cup over another group that involves the Avs, Edmonton, and Carolina, but it's all pretty well jumbled up. So the Avs are right there. But it's fascinating to see, and it's clear that the players, the core of this team, felt that some additions needed to be made. And management heard that, and management went out and made these moves. And so far, you have to feel really good about the moves, but it's not so much the newest acquisitions. Sure, we've seen some glimpses from the Casey Middlestats, the Duhaimes, the Walkers, the Trennans. They've all given us some examples of what they're going to be able to do. But I think I speak for all Avalanche fans out there. The biggest acquisition has been the return of Valeri Nichushkin. And it's funny because you bring up the numbers with Val, and we've talked about them before on this show, about how when McKinnon's been out, the Avalanche are well above 500. When Makar's been out, the Avalanche well above 500 without Makar. But without Val, they struggle to be a 500 hockey team. And, I could see why you'd look at those stats and think, that's got to be some sort of fluke, right? Some sort of just kind of aberration. But I don't know. When you watch Val back out there, and credit to him, how he kept himself in shape while he was in the player assistance program, so much so that he's come back and really has not missed a beat. When we were talking on this podcast about laying out the goals for the remainder of the season up until the playoffs started, I said my number one box to check was, can they get Val Nichushkin back to playing the level that he was at prior to going in the player assistance program, where he was a point-per-game guy through the first 40 games that he played. And the question was, okay, how long will it take for him to get ramped up? The answer, 0 time. He's right back to being the beast that he was before he left. And when you think about the Avs and what gives them such a leg up on trying to win a cup, and if they can just get enough from that supporting cast that we talk about, I don't think it's a stretch to say that in Makar and MacKinnon, you've got 2 of the top 5 or 6 players in all of hockey. Add in Rantanen, you got 3 of the top 10 to 12 players in all of hockey. Add in Nichushkin, safe to say you got 4 of the top 20, 25 players in all of hockey. That's not a bad place to start, right? When you got that kind of core. So then it's adding around it. And that's why when you look at some of these new additions and how the early, it's early. Although it's funny because as much as I think it's fair to say, hey, they just got here, let's see how this all plays out when it comes to whether or not these moves worked or not, I come back to some of the comments being made by Nathan MacKinnon, and McKinnon's one of those guys that typically during the long haul of a season, he's not really a great quote. Okay, I've done enough interviews and listened to enough athletes over the years to know who's a good quote and who's kind of a so-so quote. Most of the time, Nathan MacKinnon's just a professional, but bland quote. But there'll be times where MacKinnon will sort of drop that, sports cliche facade a little bit, and he'll tell you what he's thinking. And he's one of those guys that when he gets honest, I think you have to pay a little closer attention. Remember, this was a guy who, after they lost to Vegas in the playoffs, came out and said, I'm going into my, ninth year in the NHL, and I haven't won bleep. This is a guy who, at the beginning of this season, said, I never really felt like we had the right team last season going into the playoffs. They ended up losing in the first round. At the trade deadline, after they made their moves, he was honest in saying, I thought we were okay, but, we could have been better. We needed to get better, and management heard that, felt that, and went out and did something about it. And if you've listened to MacKinnon talk since the trade deadline, since the acquisitions, he's been, almost bubbly and effusive and bullish on what the Avalanche have done and how these new guys play and how they fit in. So for me, yeah, part of me is pumping the brakes and saying, let's see how these guys play before we get all excited about the impact they're going to make. But yet there's the other part of me. It's like, hey, if it's good enough for MacKinnon, it's good enough for me. And maybe I don't need to wait a whole long amount of time to see whether or not these guys are going to fit in. It seems like MacKinnon thinks it's going to happen. If that's the case, then we're in for a fun run around here. It's amazing how much things can change just with a 5-game winning streak, and how prior to this winning streak a week ago, we were talking, it may have even been earlier this week on Monday, we were saying, okay, the Avalanche right now are third in their division. If the playoffs were to begin today, they'd be opening up on the road in Winnipeg. Not necessarily the greatest of first-round matchups. Suddenly now the Avs, by virtue of winning 5 in a row, and Dallas and Winnipeg kind of, scuffling a little bit, the Avs have jumped over them. Avs are tied with Dallas, but hold down the top spot in the division as we're talking here right now. And suddenly you're looking at them with a chance to finish with the number 2 and maybe even put pressure on to have the top seed in the West. Home ice throughout the course of the entire playoffs. Not a bad deal. So it's funny how things can change. The Avalanche are putting together a good stretch of hockey. And, you've got the team in a good place right now. Curious to see how it plays out. But you start also talking about some of the individual accomplishments and the individual achievements. And Nathan MacKinnon, in his bid to win his first Hart Trophy, I was just checking the MVP odds before I came to talk to you. And MacKinnon continues to be in good position, continues to be the pretty heavy favorite as of right now to be the MVP. It's gotten a little close behind him. He's still ahead of Nikita Kucherov. Connor McDavid has entered the conversation. Austin Matthews is there as well. But at least the last time I checked, it looked like MacKinnon was still trending as the pretty solid favorite to win the MVP. And hey, no insult to those other players, but the year that Nathan MacKinnon is having already has zoomed past his career high, which he set last year at 111 points. He's already gone past that and should finish with upwards of 130, 140 points, which is just amazing. But and Jared Bednar was talking about MacKinnon, and you look at a guy like MacKinnon, and you think about what makes great players. What's the common thread that sort of connects great players together in all sports? And I think one thing that I noticed, and I think we're seeing it here with MacKinnon, is that you're never satisfied. You always think there's another gear to go to. You always think that there's something else you can do, whether it's your training on the ice, off the ice. Maybe there's a part of your game that you feel could be strengthened. You work on that during the course of the summer, but you're never satisfied. You're constantly striving to get better. That's what the greats have. And as you look at Nathan MacKinnon, here he is into now over a decade in the NHL. Boy, does that blow your mind, by the way? Over a decade in the NHL. But here he is this late in his career, although he still feels like he's got so much hockey left ahead of him. He does. But here he is this deep into his career, and he's putting together back-to-back career years. First time in his career, he's gone over 100 points. Did last year, doing it again this year. So it shows a not only a knowledge and a better understanding of how to play the game, but a guy that just keeps striving to get better and better, more well-rounded, and you just wonder, where is this thing going to go? Because he's not going to let up. That's the thing about MacKinnon. There's no let up in this guy. He's never going to get satisfied. He's just knows one way, and it's all out, and we're reaping the benefits as fans of watching this guy play. He's been marvelous to watch. He just has. So good stuff with MacKinnon. Good stuff with the Avs. We did see the Avs pull off that comeback the other day, and I suppose this is. I'll throw a question out to all of you as Avs fans, and just kind of leave you with this. The Avs have shown an incredible ability to come from behind this year. They lead the league in come from behind wins. They lead the league in come from behind wins for multiple goal deficits, 2 or more. They made NHL history. I love how the way that you can look at the stats and dive into the stats and find these things is amazing. But the Avalanche became, let me see if I have this off the top of my head here. The Avalanche became the first team in NHL history. This is over a century of hockey, right? First team in NHL history to have three goal deficits in which they came back to win while not allowing any more goals. So 3 different times this season they fell behind 3-0, never gave up a goal the rest of the way, and came back to win the game. It's never happened in the history of the NHL until this year. The Avs have done it 3 times. And by the way, those 3 games in which they were down 3-0, never gave up another goal, and came back to win, all 3 on the road. But here's the question. So it's great that this team has the comeback gene in them, right? But on the other hand, are you worried at all that this is a team that tends to get off to slow starts? That this is a team that gives up first goals a lot of times? Saw it during the playoffs against Seattle. Gave up a goal in all 7 games of that series, the first goal. Sure, it's nice to be able to come back. It's nice to know you have the ability to come back. But wouldn't you feel a little bit more at ease as a Avs fan if they could jump on a few teams a little bit more and grab that lead and play with the lead as opposed to having to come from behind? Although MacKinnon the other day said, he goes, at times, he said they felt this way at times during the Stanley Cup run. They felt more comfortable playing from behind. Okay, I'll take you on your word that you feel more comfortable playing without the lead. I just think it might make it a little easier from time to time to grab that lead and have that lead and play with it for a while. But hey, you guys do you. You do what works. I'm not here to argue with the results because right now the results are looking pretty good. That'll do it for this week of the Mile High Hockey Podcast presented by Fort Comfort Gutters. Big game coming up over the weekend. Avs and Edmonton, MacKinnon and McDavid, and quite possibly, depending on how everything works out, maybe a Western Conference Finals preview. Again, we saw it a couple of years ago. That went really well for the Avalanche. Maybe we could see Avs and Oil again in the playoffs. That would be a lot of fun. But we'll be back on early next week to talk about that and everything else concerning the Avs, who are rolling right now. Keep it up. We'll have some fun next week. Enjoy your hockey. We'll talk to you again next week.